Afternoon.
Hi, Barry.
Kathy, can you start the recording?
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, I'd like to call to order the Homeless Strategies Work Group for Friday, September 25th, 2020. It is approximately 1:30 p.m. and welcome everybody. The first thing I'd like to do is do a quick roll call, but before we do, I'd like to welcome our newest member from the Bellingham City Council, and that is Council Member Hannah Stone. Thank you for being here. Can you just give us a little quick introduction and then we'll proceed with the agenda.
Great, thanks, Barry. So yeah, as Barry mentioned, my name is Hannah Stone and I serve on the Bellingham City Council as the Ward 1 representative. In addition, here in Bellingham, I am a local immigration attorney and a mother of 2 school-age children. I usually joke that I'm a single mother of 3 because sometimes I count my husband as my oldest child, and if any of you know Brad, you'd appreciate that. But our kids are at Whatcom and Bellingham High School, so I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Barry.
Yes, and that's familiar in my house too. I'm the oldest child, so thank you for being here. Kathy, could you please call the roll? Kathy, are you there? She had some audio problems the other day on her system, so we're going to go ahead and skip that for now. Meeting summary from last meeting. Does anyone have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any changes to those minutes, additions, deletions? Hearing none, does anybody have any objections over those minutes? Otherwise, we'll just say they're unanimously approved. Okay, those minutes are approved by unanimous consent. We will move into our chart. Has anybody had a chance? I remember we talked 2 weeks ago, we talked about everyone kind of reviewing this. This is the alternative strategies and responses that we have accumulated throughout the life of this work group. And we want to make sure that we keep it current and projects on here that we are wanting to pursue. So has anybody got anything they want to add or suggest taking off of this list? Marcus.
Hi, I just want to make sure that we can all acknowledge that we've got the money right now to afford these lovely palletized portable structures that we could easily build small villages with an overnight sensation of getting those together. And then all we have to do is provide services and administration. So I hope that we can make that a priority right now.
Okay, is there a version of, is there a program on here, Marcus, that we would be able to fit that under and then specifically call that out? Have you seen it on the worksheet?
I'm not looking at the worksheet right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. Let me just make a note to look at that, to see where that might fit in. Any other observations on our list?
Councilmember Buchanan, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Great. If you'd like me to call the roll, I'm happy to do so.
Sure, go ahead.
So I'll count you as here, Barry Buchanan, Tyler Schroeder, Carol Frazee, Michael Lilliquist.
Here.
Hannah Stone.
Here.
Seth Fleetwood.
Here.
Riley Sweeney. Michael Shepard. Hans Erkinger Davis. Mike Parker.
Here.
Nick Lewis. Ann Back. Here. Karen Burke. Dean White said he wasn't able to attend. Flo Simon.
Here.
Doug Chadwick. Mike Hilly.
Here.
Guy Ochogrosso, Marcus Steedham,
Right here.
Joel Kennedy,
Here.
Emily O'Connor,
Here.
Michael Barris,
Saw him on video. I'm not
Here.
hearing him. There he is.
thank you. Lisa Marks,
She called me this morning, family emergency.
Oh, Kathy, this is Dean White. I don't know if you would pass my name before I got on.
oh, I thought maybe you weren't able to attend. I got an email from Jen.
I am for a bit. I've got another conflict I'm gonna have to go attend to shortly, but I'm here briefly.
Thank you, and we have a quorum, Councilmember Buchanan.
Yeah, and I see Hans is here. He's checked in. I see him. Okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about safe parking. Yes, Emily.
Excuse me. Yeah, you asked about where it might slot into the worksheet. On page 6 of the worksheet, there is reference to year-round shelters with case management, and currently there are 3 proposals or possibilities underneath there. And it could be a 4th possibility. Again, as Mr. Stidham pointed out, it's more than the pallets, it's the property, it's the program, it's the personnel, but
Right.
that's where it would belong. And that is part of our original charter, not just to handle, to add to our overall sheltering capacity.
Right, right. Yes, Emily.
Yeah, and admittedly, I'm not an expert on this document yet. There's a lot packed in there, but I'm not seeing specifically where like families with children is called out. And so I would love that to kind of get disaggregated from some of those categories in a way that it could have its own attention. Or only spot to put that, but from a structural change.
Page 7 does include a reference to expand number of family home shelters. But it's really kind of there's not much there.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means.
Well, I think that's why we're looking at this. We want to freshen it up. And I think that you make a very good point, Emily, that needs to be really identified on there as its own standalone piece.
Thank you.
So Kathy, can you make note and add that to the chart?
Yes, I'll update the chart.
Thank you. Anything else on our chart? Okay, we'll move along to safe parking. If I remember right, Rick was going to check back in with us this week after he had some meetings. Go ahead, Mr.
Sure.
Sutcliffe.
The city will be issuing a request for proposals this coming Wednesday. We believe it'll be Wednesday, certainly next week, that will solicit a group or organization that wishes to support safe parking. The RFP was written to be scalar. In essence, it could be as small as someone looking for assistance to do it in a church parking lot, or as large as someone wishing to come forward and use a larger area to provide overnight parking. And we're asking for folks to look at what they believe the costs would be to establish that and their needs, and to submit proposals. I think it's a fairly quick turnaround, but we'll report back in a couple of weeks on what interest we've seen on this release.
Okay, it's good to hear that you're moving forward, Rick. Thank you. Any questions or comments on safe parking?
I have one question.
Sure.
Rick, what kind of demand do we believe is out there?
It's changing. When we started this process last spring, the HOT team said they estimated about 60 folks were living in vehicles. It's increasing, but it's anecdotal. We don't have a hard count on the numbers.
Thank you.
Marcus.
I can maybe add to the anecdote on it anyway, in that we receive a lot of through our website. We have signups for "Are You Homeless" button, and I'm going to say probably 1 to 2 people a week in the last over the summer have been talking about moving into their cars and looking for options.
Thanks, Marcus.
Okay, other thoughts about safe parking?
Barry?
Yeah.
Rick, you said you were sending that out on Wednesday of next week. Is that correct?
We hope to issue it on Wednesday. It'll be in the Bellingham Herald. We'll put it on the website. It'll be available. We'll
Is there a
circulate
way
it,
to
certainly.
kind of preview that and just get a look at that before that, or are we just waiting in this group too until?
So the city is the one issuing it, not the city and the county, and we're going through our process to do so right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, let's move to Emily and Michael Barris and that group that did. Joel was involved, I think, too. You guys were talking about the year-round sheltering for families. So go ahead and Emily, I guess we'll let you take it off.
Okay. We did meet as a little subcommittee and are going to work on some objectives for that small group. So stay tuned for an update. We just met this week. Stay tuned for an update on that process. But I would like to circle back to the conversation that we started at our last meeting around emergency motel stays for families with kids. And I had promised to try and work with our partners to pull together some data that this group could then digest and think about making some recommendations on. So that data request has been sent out, and Opportunity Council and the Homeless Service Center, as well as our city and county partners, are going to help us pull together some good information, really to look at a couple of things. To look at how much money we're spending on emergency motel stays for families with children, to look at what the outcomes are from those emergency motel stays, meaning where is it that families are then, what type of intervention are families moving into when they move out of motels? Is it rapid? What that is. Also to look at the average length of stays that families are staying in motels, like what is that range and what's kind of the average? And then to be able to sort of think ahead about this coming, say, 10 months with COVID, et cetera, and anticipate what we think that need. As I shared last time, we're seeing the number of intakes and the wait list for families with kids rise pretty significantly over the past few months. So if we can take a minute to sort of anticipate what the need might be in the coming months. And so I will bring that information back to this full group as soon as I have it. And I'd love to then set aside a really good chunk of time to do some brainstorming about that. And I'll say just a couple of other things. One, that it seems like maybe it would be great if this group could make a recommendation on that issue, either to our different councils or the exec's office around funding for families with kids for this coming winter. And then also really to think more strategically about the long term with regard to prevention around homelessness, and to think about adopting some priorities about a trauma-informed approach to how we do this work. So for example, we know that child trauma is significantly correlated and causally related to a lot of poor health outcomes over the lifetime. For example, children with an adverse childhood score of 8, more than 1 in 3 of them will experience homelessness in adulthood. So we know that there's a big correlation between child trauma and things like homelessness. And so if we want to make long-term change, it's on us to try and reduce instances of trauma within childhood. That's just really great strategic thinking for reducing homelessness overall. So I'd love for us to focus a little bit on how it is that we do service interventions, and can we make them as trauma informed and proactive as possible. I think sort of the last thing I'd say on that subject is that it seems like a great goal for us as a community, as government entities, as nonprofits, as service providers, if we could try and look at reducing trauma that happens as a result of lack of resources or as a result of one's race, right? So, I mean, trauma happens in the world, but there's so much trauma that happens because people don't have access to the resources that they need. And so if we can sort of use that as a lens to see if we can reduce those instances of trauma, seems like that would be a really great goal. And one way that we can do that is by focusing on children now whose families are experiencing a housing crisis. So just sort of a preface of conversations that I would love for us to have as a group. And I'm hoping, say 2 weeks from now when we meet again, to have maybe some of that data ready to dig into a little bit.
Yes, Michael.
I just want to follow up on a couple of things Emily has said this meeting and a prior one. So you all know that I'm relatively new on this committee. And since the last meeting, I have started doing research, a couple hours every other day, looking into model programs serving children and families. And it's very easy to find model programs for cities in our country that are serving people without homes. It is very difficult to find model sites that focus on children and families, which is exactly why, Emily, I agree with you about having a separate area of that chart. That information on children and families tends to be buried where it's hard to get to, and it very often seems to fit in under veteran services. And I'm not current enough to know why that happens under model programs. But I think that I really agree with Emily. So this is a long-winded way of saying, yeah, we need a separate area on that chart, and we need to pay a particular focus on youth and families.
Thanks, Michael. Other comments on Emily, if you could keep me up to speed on if you guys are going to be ready to do want a little bit more time on the agenda, let me know as soon as you know, and then we'll certainly block that time out for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barry.
Mike.
Yeah, I just want to echo in support of what Emily's saying, and then just kind of remind some of the members of the group. I believe it was in 2018, and Emily, I think your agency was a part of it. We did an analysis, and the health department staff, I think it was Chris D'Onofrio. That was a snapshot in time, and we were particularly looking at the dollars we're spending on moteling families with children. It would be very worthwhile probably to exhume that document and then do a comparison. Oh, you've got it?
Yeah,
that would be really
useful. It has been exhumed in the past few weeks, but I think it's probably way low from what we experienced in 2020. Yeah, but it's a good reference point.
Yeah, I think it's important, and the work has been done. And I also like, Emily, what you said, that we need to make a recommendation. I think we did a pretty good lift in 2018, took a look at it, and it kind of died. And it'd be really important to further the work. So once we get the data, I'm in support of making some kind of action on it. So thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Dean?
Yeah, I know that in the next section we're going to be talking about winter shelter and so on, but I would just like to echo, I think what it was a very good sort of overview by Emily on behalf of families with children, that a similar analysis really needs to be made around youth and young adults. And I know there's some press to try to reestablish the winter shelter that we operated for youth. And I'm concerned about, that sort of decision being made, in isolation from looking at the larger context of what really needs to be done on behalf of youth in terms of year-round shelter, as well as options moving them out of shelter into housing. I've had some discussions recently within our staff about young adult use of ground floor, and then they're sort of where they disappear to into what's called trap houses that are essentially operated by drug dealers as a place for youth to crash, and whether we ought not to be talking about an alternative, even in the thinking about the winter as well as ongoing to that kind of use of a a situation that's very risky and unhealthy for young adults. And so I guess what I propose is, and I know Ann, back you had reached out to our staff, sort of asking about where we are in relation to talking about shelter dollars and the ESG dollars that are now becoming available for related to coronavirus over the next couple of years. I would propose that we have a subgroup that needs to talk about alternatives around shelter or other options for youth that we could bring back to this group.
Hey, Dean, what's the status? Is ground floor still operating?
It absolutely is. And in fact, we have, after the winter shelter closed, and there were real challenges with how that was operated relative to its, first of all, it's being right in the same space really as the ground floor. But once we had just the ground floor operating, and when COVID began, we expanded the hours of the ground floor, even though our funding doesn't cover that. We've been utilizing some COVID funds and then just frankly unrestricted funds from the agency to expand the hours of that. And there's been a lot of work being done, retooling and restructuring the way that program works. It was initially, once COVID started, just really a space for youth and young adults to come in and do laundry and take showers and make connections and so on. And it lost some of that earlier capability of creating more of a cultural and a community space. But we're trying to reestablish that now in recent weeks. But it's a connection point for youth, and we're learning a lot about what youth young adult needs are for shelter and housing through that group.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to talk to you offline too about what it might take to look at the winter sheltering.
I'd be happy to do that. And I guess I would ask then that you and I find a time. I've got to leave this meeting. I've got another critical meeting I've got to join. And I think I've had my 2 cents worth. I don't know whether I could contribute more in any case.
Okay, I'll give you a call. We'll set something up.
That sounds fine. Thank you.
Anything else on families and children? I know the county council in our discussions over the summer on council members' priorities, families and children just in general rose to the number one priority of the council. So we're really, there's going to be a lot of focus on the Child and Family Action Plan that's been submitted, and we're obviously going to be looking at this pretty hard too, the homeless piece. So stay tuned for hopefully good news. But I'd like to kind of formulate some ideas on what we think it's going to take, and we're going to need to do that quickly because budget season is in full swing right now. So, Michael?
Going back several years now, there was a possibility that Whatcom County's health department would be consolidating where its people work and moving out of the Girard Street facility. And there was talk at that time of potentially making that building available for a retrofit for a special needs shelter. And one of the ideas mentioned at the time was for families or people with children. And the idea is that kind of shelter would be more compatible with the nearby residential area and the nearby schools. And that didn't go anywhere. The county executive at the time was not enthusiastic and no one pushed the point. Is there any discussion by the current administration on your long-term facility needs, and would that building become available? Because it was supposed to be available about 2 years away, and that was 2 years ago. So can you tell me anything about your facility planning?
I know it's a real set of musical chairs at this point because we're looking at the Northwest Annex and what to do with that. There's some talk about putting some county administrative services out there, potentially even the sheriff's office at Northwest and Smith. And then that would, it's like freeing up some space in maybe in the Civic Center over here. I'm in the courthouse, so I'm pointing that way. And then there's the State Street building, and then there's the morgue. There's all these moving pieces right now that we don't know exactly how we're going to manage the departmental flow into those buildings. But Girard Street would be one that I would think, and that's just, this just makes sense to me, that it's going to be the one that would potentially be available for something like this. But let me dig out the last facilities report we had, and I'll report back to the group kind of what that might look like, and look at how those vacancies are going to occur over time, because it's complicated. It really is.
I am, this is probably well above my pay grade, but I will just say, as somebody who's currently sitting in the Gerard Street building with an insane amount of workload, I would be curious how during this time we would, or any time in the near future, or at least for COVID, evacuating this building and finding a new workplace. But again, very much above my pay grade. And I do remember Tyler Schroeder came to this meeting. Oh, Anne's here. Tyler Schroeder came to the meeting and talked about the idea of State Street eventually being that partnership with Opportunity Council, St. Peace Health, all that. I don't know where that still is in play, but I know that was a building that was discussed for that purpose as well.
Yeah, I know it's super complicated. Anne?
I think Anne just said what I was going to say is, I think on your agenda for County Council next Tuesday is discussion about the State Street building, which Gerard Street staff would have to move there in order to open up Gerard Street. So there is nothing in the near future that makes Gerard Street available for this purpose.
I would just maybe lob in here that if we started this, I think, Michael, with a like families with children lens, which I would really hope that, as I said, that we could look at like a trauma informed approach and really think about, if we're talking about emergency shelter space for children, that we're thinking about what children actually need, like outdoor space and places to play. And so I want us to raise our bar in looking at these interventions, especially when it comes to children, because we know that the impact that we can make will last a lifetime if we can do it right and do it a little bit better than the low bars that we've set. That aside, great, more shelter buildings for some of our unhoused populations, awesome. But I would push back if we're talking about kids.
Joel.
I'm wondering if it would be useful to make a distinction between families and children and youth. I guess in my mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong or straighten me out here somehow, I'm thinking youth and young adults as unattached. They have different kinds of needs than families and young children.
Marcus? Unmute, buddy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did. Yeah, no, it always feels to me like I'm beating a dead horse or something, and I certainly don't mean to beleaguer the issue. I think that a family village is a great way to go. And when you're talking about the Northwest Annex out there, the HomesNOW, that was the first site that the county actually offered us, was the giant field over there, and so lots of room and stuff like that for kids. You can make different villages for different needs. And while we're talking about that, I really do want to speak about the services that are necessary. For, you could have a veterans camp, you could have a women's camp, a battered shelter, a DV camp, whatever it is. We really have to promise to also bring these services to. These people are in our streets who are going to need a lot of help. I know they're out there. I've interviewed a lot of them to try to get them into Unity Village. Not everybody gets in. There's reasons, and part of the biggest part of the reason, of course, we can't bring services that we would love to be able to bring to everyone. So when it's budget time, I'm hoping that you all really regard the need that for services that we're going to have as well. It's not too big an issue, I don't think, especially if we can bring in temporary shelters that slap up overnight, and then we can really focus on getting them administrated properly and getting services to them. And I see it as a great alternative for families or single women with children or all kinds of different demographics.
Marcus, can you back up a second and tell me, you kind of breezed over it, I missed it. Where was that site that you were talking about that would work?
I'm sorry. Yes, it was the first site that Whatcom County offered HomesNOW as a possible lease, and it's almost out to the soccer fields out there at the on Northwest, out by Smith Road. and that's where the where the county planning office is and everything else. Well, if you come toward town on Northwest from that location, you'll see a large field that is also theirs. And we were going to be given a section of that field, but it was only for a 2-year lease. And the power drop there was going to cost us 65 grand, so it became really prohibitive, and so that's why we had to pass on that site. But the site was always available, and we were really green. We went out and put out stakes. So I know the county will work with us on that. I believe Satpal would.
Anything else on families of children? Any other? Okay, we'll move on.
But Barry, if I can, so wondering if we can, if I got no feedback on my question, I guess, on the, is there a distinction, you know, are we calling youth, including unattached, you know, maybe teens, young adults, sort of that category, separate from children and families? Am I correct in that?
I guess I don't quite understand the scope of your question. I think there's a mix of that. There's Northwest Youth Services. Dean has just left, but he's talking about, you know, the ground floor, which is a day kind of a operation, right? It's not overnight. So that facilitates a lot of those youth that are the young adult, not young adult, but teen, that age group. But I think child and family sheltering, what we're talking about, doesn't limit, in my mind anyway, I don't place any age on kids.
Well, yeah, it's not really a distinction of age. It's more the situation. I mean, you got teens, obviously, that get kicked out of the house or something like that, and they're basically on their own. That's a different set of needs than young kids that have parents, even though they may be separated from their parents because the parents are living in cars, the kids are in another facility, something like that. So there's, in my mind, there's two different categories of need there.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I don't know if
we have thoughts on that, Emily.
Sorry, I had to step away for a quick second. Yeah, so when we're talking about unaccompanied minors, that's one category. Right. And that's like the PAD at Northwest Youth Services, which is licensed to do shelter for minors. And that's different from unaccompanied youth and young adults who yes, they need a different, that's different from families with children, which would run, I mean, we serve 18-year-olds with their mothers or fathers or whatever the family composition is, because that's who's in the household. So definitely different populations with different needs.
And I totally agree with your trauma informed. I like that phrase. And there's different kinds of trauma that you're dealing with in a family setting than and sort of separate where kids are kind of on their own.
And the younger we can do positive intervention, the less unaccompanied youth will have, the less young adult shelters will need, the less tent encampments we'll need, and safe parking and mass shelters, and so forth, right? So it's just like remembering that we have an opportunity now to address really well from that prevention lens, the families with children, to make sure that those kids don't end up our service consumers in the next generation. And that's what we're doing now, right? We know that we're coming up short, and we're going to serve them in our systems down the road. But if we could just raise that bar a bit, we don't reap the benefits immediately, but it would be a huge return, and it would last, it's permanent. So anyway, just requires picking our eyes up a bit, which I know can be really hard in the midst of crisis, but I think we can do it.
Marcus.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how this fits in, but it is a thought that also I just want to keep us all in mind, that we keep all of us in mind, and the reminder that all of us are tired of hearing about. We're in an emergency crisis pandemic, and the medically fragile are probably the group that I'm very concerned about. Families, very concerned about just elders in general, but the medically fragile folks out there are a group that we need to prioritize as well, especially during a pandemic. And I helped all summer to, I had a nurse come forward and ask for help to host a camp in his backyard where he could host 3 or 4 tents, and he needed help finding people for it who were medically fragile. And through the HomesNOW roster, I could find him some people. It was a wonderful thing. I tried to get other people interested in it. It wasn't exactly maybe by the rules, but it was an emergency, and that camp still operates today, and they've taken great care of each other. But it was made by a nurse because he wanted to see medically fragile people who wanted to get stabilized, isolated, do so, and it worked in spades.
Mike.
Barry, I just had a quick question. I believe we're still on the agenda item of reviewing the list of strategies. And
well, we're really on
families
around sheltering for families, but I think it plays into the list, obviously.
Plays in the list. What I was going to offer, I did not go through it with a fine tooth comb. As I look at it briefly now, some of it is kind of dated and really could use some updates. If we have some of those and would care to do that off time, could we make suggestions and just submit those to Kathy?
Yeah, that's what we asked last time, but we'll ask again.
Yeah.
That folks take a look. I'll have her send that out again so you have it at the top of your inbox. Yeah. And dig into it. There's a lot of general categories in there, like the one I just saw was smaller specialized shelters that I don't know that we've really identified those special populations and what those programs might look like. So that's just an example of where we haven't flushed out the work that we've already done. And you're right, Mike, it is dated. There's a lot of stuff in there that could probably come off, and there's other things that could go on. And we could actually be a little more specific maybe about some of these items that are on the list. So that would be my suggestion. Emily?
Yeah, I wonder maybe, Mike, if you and Ann and I, or a few of us could get together maybe and actually look at it a little bit more closely and come up with some recommendations, because it's a long list, which is a little bit overwhelming. And maybe then we could narrow our focus on some, like, let's work on these 3 priorities in the next X period of time or something. I don't know, just maybe some of those of us who are ingrained in the service sector could make some recommendations back to the full committee.
I think, Emily, that's a super idea. I'm totally willing to do that. I think it would just make it more palatable to do, and a good use of this committee's time to do some of that outside. So thank you for that suggestion. I'm totally game.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. That we definitely appreciate that.
Councilmember Buchanan, this is Kathy Halka with the council office. I'd be happy to take any edits that anyone has, however you want to do it, if you want to mark it up or send me an email list, whatever's easier for you. And then I just also wanted to remind the work group members that a while back ago, the last thing we did in, I think, February was to add in where those items matched with the priorities of the plan to end homelessness. So you can see those in the right column. And that was kind of our first effort to prioritize. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay, great. Anything else on the families? Okay, we'll move on to winter sheltering. I guess I'll start with Ann Beck. If you have any more updates on winter shelter department?
No, not too much more. I think I reported out the latest last time. I did, as Dean mentioned, reach out to Northwest Youth Services to talk a little bit. We have some ESG money, Emergency Solutions Grant, that's kind of COVID related. But looking at the guidelines, we could look at being able to offer some money there to figure out how to provide more winter needs. We're trying to focus on maybe special populations that might be in particular need. But we're still doing a lot of that legwork and still having some of those conversations. So I don't have anything concrete to share with you since last time.
Okay, thank you. And since we have you here today, Hans, did you want to give any kind of a update on base camp?
Sure. Yeah, we had our high mark just the other day, a couple days ago, when the rains really started kicking in. we had, I think, 174 people staying at base camp, men and women. And our capacity is 200, but that's still pretty high for us. Our capacity is more easily realized once we get these dividers set up and they're on order, and they'll be arriving next month. Allows people to be closer together, but more privacy, but you can get more people in the area. So right now, when we start to get over around 160, people start getting on mats out into the common areas of base camp. If you've been there to see that. Otherwise, it's we're pretty pleased with how smooth it's running. I know we're working with Christ the King to do an overflow shelter in our old drop-in center building. So they'll be basically there for when our numbers get too high, but the plan, at least right now, we're still talking about it. The plan is there'll also be a severe weather shelter supporting that effort too. So when it hits the certain degree marks, temperature marks, I should say. So yeah, it's we're pleased with that. That'll be, we haven't laid the mats out yet to see, but we're thinking it'll be around 35 people that the overflow shelter can host, on top of the 200 we have at base camp.
Michael Barris.
Are there still 2 families at base camp?
I believe there's 1 family right now, but there has been 2 in the past, yeah.
Any other questions for Hans on base camp?
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
And how many children, when there were 2 families, how many kids were there involved? And now with 1 family, how many kids?
I believe it's just 1 kid right now. And I think when we had the 2 families, there was, I think, a newborn and a young toddler.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Hans? Marcus.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, have you managed to stay COVID-19 free in the facility?
We did have a staff person come up with or test positive for COVID-19 at our women and family shelter that we have, the Agape home. And so we initiated all the response plans to that and quarantined her and had everybody tested, and quarantine folks potentially that could have gotten it, and everyone came up negative still. So still 0 cases of COVID-19. And we probably tested in the last 6 months a few dozen folks that seem to have, that might warrant testing, and we've still had all negative tests. So it's kind of blowing my mind.
Thanks for sharing. That seems almost statistically improbable, but thank you so much. I'm glad it's working out for you guys.
Yeah, I am too. That was one of my biggest fears as we went into this pandemic, was how you guys were going to be able to get through it without having mass infections.
Yeah.
But
well, I'll say it was a huge help of the county and the city and the school district to get us into the high school and then into the public market space to allow the social distancing and all the cleaning and everything that's necessary for that. I mean, there's still plenty of folks that aren't wearing masks, and it's just one of those things you can't force people to do it. But it's so we certainly have the concerns, and people are still, our staff are being very careful about it. But yeah, we still haven't had it, and I'm like I said, it's blown my mind. I'm pretty dang pleased about it.
Yeah, Mike Parker.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just want to just state some words of appreciation. Opportunity Council, Greg Winter, myself, and some others on a brief tour of base camp. Not only were impressed at just the layout, but the compassion of the staff and the way it's been done, and in doing that all through a pandemic. I just want to really just state our gratitude for the work of you and for all of your staff and the guests that are following your rules and doing all the stuff they're supposed to be doing. It was really something to do, and I know it's a huge lift behind what we saw that looked very well running. So just thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It's appreciated.
Yeah, we really appreciate the work you do, Hans, and your team. So keep it up, please.
Thank you.
Other sheltering. Marcus, do you have anything from HomesNOW or from Unity Village?
No, we've got some people who have been finding shelter, some people who are on the horizon of looking to get shelter, and we've got a new tenant in recently, and everything's going smoothly, and we are also miraculously COVID free.
Yeah, that's quite a blessing that we got through this without having any incidents like that. Anybody else got anything else on winter sheltering, either emergency or temporary? Okay, we were going to talk a little bit about encampment cleanups and sweeps. We're going to follow up from last time. And Marcus, go ahead, kick it off.
Oh, well, no, I just wanted to also just again reiterate I'm sorry that we kind of skipped past that last part. I am very concerned that we get temporary shelters up immediately. I think it's something that we need to do to try to keep up with progressive cities across America. We're lagging behind. I've been calling for temporary tent encampments since last spring, and now winter's breathing at our door. We have the money to do it. We have the will to do it. We have shelters available to do it. I think we said it was 300 that were available down there in Everett. 300 units. We can easily get it all we need or all we want. And so let's not scratch it off the list as an idea, something we can do. In fact, we should put it right up top as a priority to get these pallet shelters out of Everett and immediately bring that aid. And so we can deal with the next subject, which is the camp cleanups, which is something that I have had to have my hand on. I felt the need to have my hand on because it didn't seem like anybody else's hand was on it all summer long. And so I'm glad to hear the report from the BPD. I know they just released their camp cleanup document finally, and I've been reviewing it. I have stuff to say about it, but I want to hear what BPD has to say about it, and I look forward to that.
Is there anybody from the city that wants to speak to that? Yes, Dave.
I could just say, yeah, we provided that out. And I believe Councilmember Stone has talked about bringing forward to council some of these issues as well. I don't know if that's for sure on the 28th or where it ended up, but I know we talked about that. Yeah, we want to make it real clear what our procedures are. Hopefully that document is helpful for folks to see how we do things. It's kind of an ever-evolving document. We change it based on a lot of different factors, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone's clear on how it works. We consulted some of our community partners with HOT and get their interpretations, so we make sure it's accurately depicted in that document. And yeah, it's there for folks to see, and I'm welcome to answer questions for it. You know, people give me a call if they have anything they need clarification on.
Okay, we have any questions for Bellingham PD?
I could go there.
Marcus?
Yeah, I'm just there were a few things in there that I was looking at, Dave. I appreciate the effort that it took in to make the document. In the introduction to the document itself, it announces an acknowledgement of the Ninth Circuit Court finding that if a person doesn't have a place to be, if there's no alternative place for them to go, that they have a right to occupy the space where they are, including in thoroughfares and rights of way. I'm appreciative that the COB, or at least the BPD, is acknowledging that finding by the Ninth Circuit Court. But it goes on to say, with adequate shelter capacity, the city has the right to move people along. Absent that capacity, campers can remain on public land and rights of way. Capacity is kind of an interesting word here, and I'm going to be seeking some clarification on that, and probably on the document, if you don't mind. It seems to me that we have a capacity is one thing, availability is another. When the shelter isn't available to several people on the streets, hundreds really. The way the document seems to read it, there's one bed available at Lighthouse Mission, then everybody gets moved along. And of course, that's disingenuous and not a good spirit. I'm hoping we can sharpen that up. It also claims in the document that Whatcom County Health Department did not make any recommendations. And on March 20th, Homeless Strategies Workgroup meeting, Ann Deacon said, people in encampments are probably best to stay there if they can keep their distance in those situations. So there's that part. And then I have other questions too. So I don't mean to take up too much time, but I think that it's all important. The cleanup process itself, on line 12, says that prior to the cleanup, your enforcement officer would, not enforcement officer, I can't remember the word that's used now. And I also want to know, is Claudia Vizcarra an officer? Because she's been told, I've been told she was an officer until just this last couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden I'm hearing, oh, she's a citizen. And so I don't know. So I'll be asking for that as well, Dave, and I appreciate it. But line 12, prior to cleanup, Vizcarra or her role will assess how far prior to the cleanup would she be there? Because ideally that needs to be assessed at the time of the cleanup, or we're not doing an accurate assessment. And it's something that Dave Dahl agreed with me on back July 25th when Hannah asked for these documents. Does she go there personally, or is she assessing that through references to other materials submitted to her? Is she qualified to make that assessment when she is there, especially during the COVID times? Again, on the 25th of July, Dave Dahl left the meeting saying he was going to seek out health department recommendations and even a person to be in the field with the cleanup crew to decide whether or not the camp should be cleaned up at the time of cleanup based on CDC recommendations and health department recommendations. So he went off to go seek that position. That position remains unfilled. And from my perspective, no one is there qualified to make the call yet. So there's that part. And so again, I mentioned to you city property and rights of way on line 17, where you mentioned that they won't be there, that under no circumstances on city property or rights of way would anybody be allowed to be there and then moved along immediately. Is that consistent with the Martin versus Boise Ninth Circuit Court finding, which you referenced in your own document? That's my first blush on this. And I wish that I had more access with you guys to work on this policy. I'd be glad to. I'm available to. I know that Hannah was there to bounce that off of. Sounds like the hot team was available to bounce that off of. I know they expressed a want to do that, and I'm doing so too. So thanks for finally getting that together. We've come a long way, and now I feel like we're about where I thought we were in June when I asked, can the officers on the ground finally know what the policy is? All right, thanks, guys. And again, if I can have have any answers on that, Dave, I appreciate it. Including, is Vizcarra an officer? I just don't know who she is. So thanks.
Yes, go ahead, Hannah. So
I don't know if Lieutenant Krause wanted an opportunity to respond, but I just wanted to address initially. I appreciate the opportunity to sort of walk through those procedures with Lieutenant Krause and his team at the Bellingham PD. But really going through that process shined a lot of lights on what we sort of already knew, but the gaps in the system and the gaps with respect to services. And so what Lieutenant Krause referenced earlier was my request of council to have a broader sort of candid policy discussion about, homelessness and our policy. So sometimes I know that Marcus is using sort of policy and procedure interchangeably, but I just want to be clear that what's produced by the Bellingham Police Department is their procedures, and those, that's what happens on the ground. But I think there needs to be some broader discussion by the council as far as the policy, and especially during times of pandemic or other emergencies, whether that be during the winter months or during smoky, cloudy skies, developing those broader policies and having those discussions about what's happening. Because yes, I mean, it's concerning that the reality is that people are being moved along and there's not necessarily a place for them to go. And that's wrong. But the reality is that right now it's not safe for them to stay where they are either. And when we have public health concerns and risks at play, there are lots of things that are juxtaposed. So this is just the beginning, but I think it's valuable for the community to have sort of a clear outline of what those procedures are and to look at that as a starting baseline. And hopefully we'll have some room to go from there.
Mr. Sepler.
Yeah, if I could, I'm a bit surprised to see this matter on your agenda. And I do need to ask just a clarifying question. We're talking a matter that most appropriately should be addressed at the city level, perhaps by the city council, as Councilmember Stone just said. It is entirely about city policy. And clearly there's some concern, but that is the right venue to do it. It's somewhat surprising a county committee is discussing how to facilitate city policy. Now, I
Well, last
understand.
time I checked, Rick, the city is part of the county. So the reason it's on the agenda is because this group requested it to just have an update. It's not that we're setting policy from this committee at all. It's informational. I think it's good for us to hear that everything is moving along. I kind of am surprised at your concern.
Fairly, I respectfully, I understand it's good to share, but we're entering to specific critiques of the policy and specific asks for information that I think are better contextually if we have the correct staff is available to respond and we have a focused discussion on it by the people who implement it. That's all. I understand you want to broadly get the information out, and we think that's always a good thing.
Yeah, and that was our intent from the committee level, the work group level. Maybe the details got a little bit down into the weeds. That I kind of agree with you there, but I think that it's important that this group understand that those policies are now in place. I mean, at least we know that much. So, Marcus?
Yeah, Rick, I just want to try to answer that for you as best as I can, and that is the fact that myself and others have been bringing it to the attention of the city council since spring, all summer long, and up till now. I've spoken with the mayor personally and intimately about it. I've spoken with multiple councilors about it intimately. I've asked for it to be brought up as an agenda item. We've asked for responses in 3-minute sessions at city council. It refuses to be brought up by whoever wants to bring it up. I've been told recently by a seated councilor that just breaks in their normal pattern to do that. They don't answer questions at city council. And so we've been, I've seen 99% of the comment section at city council, 99% of the comment section at city council has been on this issue all summer long. And there hasn't been one word spoken in city council about it. This is where we do that. Apparently, this is where we do that.
Okay, well, I don't want to get into a big, Michael?
I will get into it a little bit. The concern is that the city of Bellingham is doing something improper and in violation of our policy. I've had numerous conversations and checked into it, and I've yet to see evidence that that's what we're doing. The policy is that we, A, don't violate the constitutional rights of people who are homeless. And as I understand it, by giving notice to people, by preserving the integrity of their belongings if they're gathered, by providing people with assistance finding housing rather than just moving them along and giving them no help, we are staying within the law. And our policy, as I understand it, not the procedure, our policy is to only focus on camps that are problematic. The basis of complaints that can be found to have health risks or environmental damage or maybe criminal activity, some kind of hazardous condition. That is our policy. And then the practice simply says, how do we identify them and how do we clean them up if that's the case? And again, I have yet to see evidence that we're actually in violation of our policy. We're in violation of the law. So rather than being silent, I think myself and many other people have looked into Mr. Stidham's concerns. And if I felt that his concerns were justified, if I felt we were doing illegitimate sweeps, I would be directly alongside him. I'm just not seeing that evidence. So what I've said to Marcus is I'm not being silent. I'm inquiring, I'm looking, I'm talking, I'm speaking, and I think other people are too. But during the city council, there's nothing yet to bring up.
Marcus?
All the evidence is in, Michael. All of it. Okay, it's all here. If if I have a phone meeting with Seth Fleetwood and he tells me that he believes the veracity of my statements, that it looks like it has all the legal merit to be argued in court, and that he's going to act based on it, I just await action. That conversation happened September 1st. If you'd like to answer to that, Seth, I'd be glad to hear more about that because we were on the same page on September 1st. It has come to light that VPD was in the absence of policy. As far as practices, as far as You know, Michael, honestly, I'm telling you, I observed it. I saw what I saw. I can tell you right now that we now have the definition of sweeps by the BPD. And in the 2 days that I observed, I saw sweeps. I saw people get moved without any notice, without even their faces being looked at. 15 minutes, get out. And they get out. Where can I go? I'm not answering that question. They don't answer the question. These officers without masks in the field have been moving people around in the rain. I'm not trying to rail at the BPD, but I am railing at policy and practices here. I have shown people on this group and others, and I have the written orders from the packet of the orders that say, clear everybody off of this street. Clear everybody off of this street. That means if you're new here, get off of this street. That's a sweep. I've got more and more and more and more evidence. The letter has been submitted to the work group. If you don't choose to believe it, that's fine. But for you to sit here and tell me that you talk to Dahl, he's got policy, and you don't believe me because his policy stands, it's not what's happening. The officers in the field have no idea what the policy is. I don't even know that they do today. I presume they have this copy finally. It's what I asked for in the early June, and it never happened until now. If I had dropped the ball on this, then this may not have happened either. We're in a COVID emergency. We've been told practices were done for COVID by Chief Dahl. We're now looking at a document that says they never received any recommendations from the health department, which is a crock. It needs fixed. I'm asking for leadership. I don't want to drag you guys through it, but don't tell me that I'm lying.
Okay, I think we've talked about this enough. Any other items anybody wants to talk about? Okay, we will take it to public comment. Kathy, is there anyone with their hands raised?
Yes, council member, we have 4 members, 6 now, 7 signed up to speak. And for those of you calling by phone, if you'd like to speak, you can dial *9, or if you're joining on your computer, you can click the hand sign. The first speaker will be Doug Gustafson, followed by JC Mansfield and Lynette Allen. Doug, please state your name for the record.
You guys hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Hey, this is Doug from HomesNOW, Not Later. I appreciate everyone's comments. I want to focus on some solutions of many. I wanted to update you guys to let you know that Unity Village continues to run smoothly and safely without a single major issue since we've been in operation for over a year. It's safer than many neighborhoods in town, and we're ready to do more. At the last Homeless Strategies Workgroup meeting, I proposed that HomesNOW could use the former Safe Haven site located in the Whatcom 911 Dispatch Center parking lot. If that location has been slated for another purpose, we understand. But if it's going to remain an empty parking lot, then it would be a really easy site to set up and get running because it already has all the hookups we need to set up a second village of around 15 tiny homes. And the Sunnyland neighborhood liked us when we were hosted there last time as a tent encampment. I know there was some issues with the permit having a clause in it that made it one and done, meaning that we weren't allowed to come back. The Unity Village permit had a similar provision about no extensions being possible, but after COVID hit, we were able to get that extension. I'm wondering if there's a way to change that for the Safe Haven site and open it up to house more people. We're looking forward to being able to do more and house more people. We do not require any direct government funding to get this working, and the construction of the new homes would not be, or would be, a community project for our volunteers and the general public. Or if the pallet homes are an option, we can move a lot sooner, but we're ready to move either way. We're excited to get started if the city is willing to work with us on this site. We already have companies and organizations that want to build the structures for free. We're ready to go. We have the paperwork ready to turn in a proposal for that site, but we want to know under which context the site might be available or not so that nobody's time is wasted either way. I'd also like to add that many of the residents of Unity Village were campers before they became residents, and every single one of them is better off than when I first met them, even the people that are no longer with us or had to leave. While there's many campers out there we wouldn't be able to help, there are still many that we could help and should help, and this is in the best interests of health and public safety and helps people repair from their trauma from being homeless. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but if we're able to set up this second site, we'd be helping over 30 people overall with our 2 sites into a stable living situation and a decent chance to find permanent housing. I want the work group to keep in mind that running Unity Village costs $1,500 a month to operate the entire thing. And we can replicate this easily if only we had a spot to build on to keep helping. We are still waiting to hear back from Mayor Fleetwood about the possibility of using the former Safe Haven site. Is Mayor Fleetwood on the call? If Mayor Fleetwood is on the call, I'd like him to answer if this is a possibility or not to house more people. If there is a possibility, then I can turn in the paperwork as early as next week to get the ball rolling, changing any details that need to be changed to move forward smoothly. If it's not possible,
30 seconds.
I'd like to hear an explanation as to why. Thank you.
Who's our next speaker, Kathy?
Next speaker is JC Mansfield, followed by Lynette Allen, and then Crystal Rodriguez. JC Mansfield, if you could state your full name for the record, please.
You broke up, Kathy, at the last minute.
If you could
Can you
state your
hear me?
full name for the record, please.
Jennifer Christine Mansfield.
Great, go ahead, please.
Okay, well, the complaint-driven cleanups are a health and safety protocol for housed people that cements bias towards unhoused people. We lack housing choices equitable to the population of Bellingham, so I'm asking the city, county, BPT, everyone involved to please keep reviewing and considering the 4th, 8th, and 14th Amendments of our Constitution when using any legal standpoint against homelessness for policy and directives that enforce municipal code or interpret state law. The BPD doc clarifying cleanups does not address why homeless people are not using the local shelter. People experiencing homelessness are not on the street by choice. They are on the street and camping illegally because they lack choices. They lack a legal place to camp and they lack housing. Homeless campers have made a public record at City Hall winters 2017, 18, and 19 with personal testimonies of why camping is safer for them using a shelter. So the justification that the BPD uses for claiming cleanups are a sound practices is pluralistic ignorance. The city remains ineffectively caught in the bystander effect by failing to see and validate people in distress. And this just diffuses their responsibility to the people by assuming that this shelter satisfies all needs and the law. I really support the HomesNOW efforts and the tiny home first, housing first efforts because they have at their disposal a database of over 200 people waiting for housing. This organization uses the housing first model, which can literally close the revolving door where money is being wasted on cleanups and open the door to more housing choices. So I really do support that effort, and I really want to give people more choices by expanding legal habitation and access points beyond the shelter. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, JC.
Next speaker is Lynette Allen. Lynette, if you could state your full name for the record, and you have 3 minutes. Go ahead, please, Lynette. Are you there, Lynette? If you could unmute yourself, Lynette, and go ahead. Are you there, Lynette? We'll come back to Lynette and go ahead on to Crystal Rodriguez, please. Crystal, if you could state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes. Crystal Rodriguez.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we do.
Oh, sorry. I didn't unmute on my end. My name is Crystal Rodriguez. And I'm calling, I just wanted to report to this group. I've been watching some of the body cam videos from cleanups, and what I'm observing and really concerned about is police officers not wearing masks and being within 6 feet of the contractors, the campers, and I think a hot team member showed up at one point. And even other officers, they are within 6 feet without wearing masks. At this time of the COVID pandemic, that just seems really irresponsible and putting a lot of people at risk. What I've also observed, and these are videos from just during this, what I've also observed on multiple occasions are campers are only given 15 minutes to vacate the spot that they're in. I've heard the police officer say that multiple times. We've given you 15 minutes, and that is the wording that they're using. They haven't seemed to know what the procedures are. At one point, they called Claudia during a cleanup asking what to do in the case that a camper didn't want to come out of the tent. So they seemed a little bit unclear on that. And from what I've learned from Lieutenant Cross, who was so nice to speak with me one day, is that these procedures are new and that there was no written procedure prior to this draft document. So to not have anything in place all summer long is really concerning. And so I fully support the efforts that Marcus has been making. I heard his passionate plea at the end there, and he's absolutely right. I can confirm from what I've seen on just a few videos that what he is saying is true. And I think there needs to be some leadership and more procedures in place to protect these guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you. We'll go back to Lynette Allen. Lynette Allen, if you could unmute yourself. I see you've unmuted. Are you there, Lynette? Okay, we'll go to the next speaker, which is listed as HK. If you could please state your name for the record. HK. The next speaker is, we'll go to Josh Soretti. If you could state your full name for the record, please.
Hey everyone, this is Josh Cerretti, C-E-R-R-E-T-T-I. I've lived most of the last decade here on Seahome Hill. Saw the Aloha go down, Max, the fence go up around the villa. I walk in the Arboretum every day. See that a lot of the people who have been pushed out of places that they were living are here in the Arboretum and various places around the neighborhood still, and haven't gotten the support they need or the support they deserve. So I really, I want to put in my appreciation for Marcus, for JC, for Doug, for everybody who's been kind of pushing on these issues, and really encourage all of my elected officials here to not rely on some semantic distinction between a cleanup and a sweep. And when you're in a position of having police officers throw people's belongings out into the trails, out into the streets, I've seen it with my own eyes, you don't want to be in the position of having to kind of parse whether you've exactly violated their constitutional rights or not. We can rise to a higher standard than just treating people with the minimum amount of constitutionally required respect. And we can really think about how the problems that we've seen increase in this community over the past decade are not the fault of the people who are living on the streets. They're the fault of the people who've been sitting in elected office, the people in the institutions, and people like me who are homeowners here who haven't necessarily made the steps to make sure that everyone feels welcome and has a place to be. And I think that the recent weather and the upcoming weather is going to make that all too clear. So I just really want to offer my appreciation for all the advocates who are fighting on this issue. And I appreciate the listening from our elected officials, but I would like to see a lot more action. Thank you, everyone.
The next speaker is Dina Jensen. Go ahead, Dina.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Hi, Dina.
Hey. Hi. So I would definitely echo what Josh just said. Pretty much all of what I was thinking of ahead of time was kind of related to his remarks, especially about the whole idea of the Ninth Circuit ruling and whether or not it's legal or not to allow, camping on public property if there is some sort of capacity somewhere for some kinds of homeless people. So in the memo have partnered with the Lighthouse Mission Ministries to establish the base camp shelter, which has capacity to avoid having to allow legal camping on public land and rights of ways. So I feel like it's not really in the spirit of trying to end homelessness to simply be avoiding having to allow legal camping on property. That, yeah, it may be legal constitutionally, maybe if you can actually establish that just the capacity at the Lighthouse Mission, which is 200 people, and we know there's a lot more homeless people than that. And we know there's a lot of people out camping because they cannot, under the circumstances that they're in, be in the mission yet. So to me, I think the city needs to embrace something a lot deeper. And I know that's a city discussion, but it's also really relevant to this committee, this work group that's trying to eliminate homelessness and stop people from having to sleep outside overnight. So I think it's really vital that you all are considering that kind of a focus and approach versus doing what is barely necessary. And again, this applies to emergency sheltering and your temperature, kind of line that you're drawing for people to have to get shelter. It's still super, super scary to me to see that there's no real progress. You have a better quality
30 seconds
this year than last year, but you don't have much additional capacity. So I hope that can be addressed. And I would second what Crystal said about the body cams. I also have seen police without masks addressing the homeless camp people in the body cam footage that I have also seen. So thank you.
The next speaker is Melissa Grag, followed by RF24 and Mary McIntosh. Go to Melissa Grag.
Hello.
Hi, Melissa, go ahead.
All right, perfect. Just making sure I can be heard. Okay, so first of all, I did not write down her name because I was multitasking. But the lady speaking to making sure that you make trauma-informed decisions and work very forward trauma-informed and handle the children first. As a houseless DV victim who's been ignored by everything in this system and completely just blown off and left to die by all of everything in Bellingham, very, very, very important. I still cannot get mental health help for my son who is 11, and it's been 1.5 years since we found out that his father molested my child and was left to roam free in Bellingham and still is. So Emily was her name. Anyway, I just wanted to give a shout out to Emily and everybody who agreed with her. Super, super, super necessary. If you don't want to see us adults out there, you have to get it in the bud when we're young. But also institutional poverty, generational, intergenerational poverty plays a big part. You got to pull us and our kids out of the poverty and help us get out of the poverty so that we can be off the system. If you would just ignore us and throw us out of camps and crap like that and don't have any shelters, we can't get out of the system. We can't. We die there. You have us there until we die. So shelters. I was offered a tent for me and my child. That's what you guys were going to give me. That's it. That's all. You had nothing else. I needed a shelter. Those pallet shelters need to happen. We need to force them to do that. That needs to be done. That should have been done months ago. This sweet BS should have been halted months ago. Mr. Lilliquist, the fact that you talked to the people doing it and are believing them over the multiple people that have actually been on the street with these people and watched it happen with their own eyes is frankly embarrassing. And I really hope that you listen to us now and realize that Marcus isn't just out there making stuff up. You think we enjoy doing this? I have so many things I'd rather be doing with my day than coming here every day and begging you people to do the basic minimum that would keep me and my kids and people like me and my children alive. You all sit around in your houses and go to bed at night in your beds, and this is just an 8-hour day to you. We live here. We're
30
out
seconds, please.
there suffering. You need to do something, and you need to listen to the people that are on the ground. I really hope you do that, Lilliquist. Thank you so much, guys.
The next speaker is RF24. You could state your name for the record, please. Go on to Mary McIntosh.
Hi, my name is Mary McIntosh. I am here to speak about the sweeps, just like everyone else. And I want to say everyone that's spoken before me has said so much of what I want to say. The new policies or procedures that were just created by the BPD state in the introductory paragraph, with adequate shelter capacity, the city has the right to move people along. What I'd like to know is, what is adequate shelter capacity? On a day where cleanups are done, dozens of people are moved from their homes and their camps. Where is there a guarantee that there are dozens of spaces available for them? At what point do they check this out and make sure that these people actually have shelter when their home is being cleaned up? Why is the HOT team not providing trash bags, things to help these people clean up? Why are we not providing porta potties and dumpsters for them so that they can live with some sanitation? I don't know how they're expected to live in clean sites in pouring rain in the woods. It makes no sense. They have nothing to do with their trash. They have nowhere to go use the restroom. These things need to be considered, and there are so many better options than just cleaning them and moving on. Bellingham is supposed to be a progressive city. I've seen absolutely no empathy given to the people on the streets, and that needs to change. I hope to see it from many of you. Thank you.
The next speaker, we'll go back to HK.
Hi.
You could state your full name for the record, please.
Hi, this is Heather Katahdin. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Great. Hi, Councilpersons Hannah, Michael Berry, and Homeless Task Force members, and hopefully Mayor Seth. I hope you're listening also. Kathy, I'm on a mobile gadget. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'll start my 3 minutes now. I'm really thankful to hear the winter shelter for teens and young adults to the ground floor is being prioritized to continue this winter. Last winter, doing nighttime citizen outreach, I assisted numerous young adults to locate the ground floor site, some who were traveling from out of state without family, and they weren't aware of its location, but they were aware of not feeling safe overnighting at a low barrier adult shelter. There are ongoing current community gaps in emergent citizen care. During our winter weather, among those
I apologize, Heather. There's if you could unmute. Are you there, Heather? Heather, could you unmute yourself, please?
Hello, Kathy. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I apologize for the interruption. If you could continue, please.
I'm not sure where I was, what part you last heard.
If you could just back up, you were talking about shelters, I believe.
I'll start with what I was saying about and if you can restart my 3 minutes, I don't know why I was interrupted. I'll start with that there are ongoing and current community gaps in emergent citizen care. During our winter weather, among those who are unsheltered is the lack of paid staff coverage on weekends and night times and holidays, when the highest risk of hypothermia and loss of limb can occur. My past experience as a retired volunteer first responder, firefighter, retired healthcare clinician, and as an experienced backpacking mountaineer has been that each time I come to town in the winter these past 2 years, I do not ever see any hot team staff as their hours are daytime hours. I do not see a medical first responder nurse on the streets. I do not see a designated crisis responder on the streets. Instead, each time I come, I see them standing or huddled up. I see vulnerable, medically fragile elders, adults, and young adults and teens on the street without adequate clothing or shelter to stay safe through a winter storm. Again, the gap many of us as outreach citizens desire to see is a paid healthcare professional. Example is a nurse who is available to be physically outside to respond and to assist to any 911 well-share check calls in regards to citizens that are disoriented and without lack of proper clothing and shelter to survive the changing winter conditions. In the past years, a network of Samaritan citizens, many who are retired healthcare workers, have assisted physically with what we call sheltering in place. The humans we meet who need an emergency blanket, need a hat, gloves, and a chemical hand warmer or a hot water bottle and protein bars to make it through the night. Each individual is unique, and many are grateful to have the faith group shelters to stay at, while others have unique circumstances that make that type of large group setting not a place they can receive restful sleep or experience safety.
30 seconds, please.
Our 911 emergency response system needs some major revisions in responding to behavioral health and severe weather calls. My ask is to fill the time gap of weekends and the evenings with professionals who can do outreach and assist those who need to be sheltered in place to survive the night. Today is September 25th. We've had smoky days, high winds, and severe weather will be coming our way. I support the offers of any nonprofits or city-county agencies that have volunteered to do the work of creating both tent encampments, pallet hut shelters, and safe parking camp locations with access to hygienic facilities like indoor bathrooms to wash hands. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Heather. Kathy, is there anyone else signed up to speak?
Yes, we have. I'll go back to RF24. If you'd like to speak, please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Rain Forever, and I think that the biggest thing listening needing to keep pointing out is that right now we have a situation where all over Washington State, if you're on SSI, you can't get indoors. No landlord will rent to you. Absolutely no landlord. You can't rent a room like in a house that you can afford. You're living on $800 a month income, and most of us can't get jobs, and if we do, we get punished so much that our income doesn't go very much higher. So you're asking us to go to the Lighthouse Mission and live there for the rest of our lives. And a lot of us don't want to be around drug addicts, criminals, thieves, mentally ill people, toxic people. We don't want to live that kind of lifestyle. And you really need to stop thinking about this as it's a temporary situation where you can just shove everybody into a shelter, because we either live outside or we get shoved into your shelters. There's no other options. There's no housing, there's no rentals, there's no, we can't even do roommate situations because of all the discrimination. And that's something that I guess I don't know what else to say other than that. Like, there's a lot of people that don't want to live the rest of their lives in the Lighthouse Mission. And that's it.
We'll go to our next speaker is Sherry Lapoff. Sherry, if you could go ahead.
I lost you, Kathy.
Yeah. We'll go back to Lynette Allen. If anybody else would like to speak, if you could press the hand icon to raise your hand virtually or dial *9 on your phone. Would anyone else like to speak? I don't have anybody else listed.
Okay, we will close the public comment period. And before we adjourn, any last thoughts from any of our work group members?
Barry, I have one.
Sure, go ahead, Emily.
Well, this issue around the sweeps keeps coming up and taking some time on this agenda. And I know there's, at the risk of sort of fanning a fire, would it make sense for this group to spend some time thinking about what, like, even sort of separate from what's currently happening, what it is that we would like to see happen around that issue? What is our community stance, and where do we want to get to in terms of practice with people who are camping? I don't know. Is this seems like here we are, right? And so do we want to maybe, I don't know, do we want to lean into this conversation and see if we can actually get a perspective that, and I get that it's complicated and it's hard but it seems like we may as well own it, right? Like, if the best we can do is what we're currently doing, then let's own that. Let's talk about it. Let's own it. Let's talk about why that's the best we can do. And then we can move on from the subject. Or if that's not the best that we can do, then what is it that where would we like to get to? And what are the obstacles to us getting to a different place? And maybe that's about identifying alternatives, which I know the city is already working on, parking, et cetera. But it seems like maybe if we have the conversation, then maybe we could turn our energies to other things. I don't know.
Councilmember Stone.
Thanks, Councilmember Buchanan. Yeah, just briefly to respond to Emily, I completely agree. And that's been my perspective, is that if it is what it is, let's own it and figure out how best to move forward. If there are gaps or questions, we need to air that out. So with all due respect, I have requested that this come before the City Council. It's not going to be on Monday's agenda, the 28th, but my understanding that it will come forward on October 12th. And so I would just request that the council grapple with that. This committee, I'm very excited to be here, but I know there's a lot of work on the plate of this work group as well. And so, yeah, I can certainly report back after the 12th.
Marcus.
Yeah, I want to echo and applaud all of that from both of you. Thank you for that. And I appreciate the speakers also speaking up to this. It does often, as you see, this thing kind of tends to be snowballing, and I want nothing more than a quick conclusion to this that ends in nothing else than sheltering, because that's my goals. I'm with HomesNOW now, homes. And that's what we do. And that's what we're trying to do. This isn't about even our brand. This is about getting homes now. This is, you know, we give services to these people. It's very expensive to give services to the people in the streets. 2 winters ago, our group went out there and an independent group of citizens went out there, but HomesNOW ended up running the money through 30 grand in 6 weeks. Some hotels, some shelters, one shelter that we ran, van rentals. To take the aid to the streets is very expensive. To have the stuff that hits the streets get swept, cleaned up, whatever you want to call it, is also very expensive. To pay officers overtime, 2 officers being paid for 3 because they're getting paid overtime every time that happens. And there's just too few of points of contact. And if we get nothing else out of the cleanup policy, I hope you'll hear me well. And Dave Crasser, I look forward to an email with your answers to my questions. But I want to make sure that we can trace an individual from the moment we make contact with them in their camp until they either get sheltered or services or moved along, as the terminology seems to be. I thank you all for your time and your taking the extra time with this. I think Emily's right. You know, I'm only sorry that this seemed to be the only venue. Thank God I'm able to bring this to you here, because it just wasn't working in city council for whatever reasons. And I'm glad that we could bring it out in the air here. And now we can all take the attitude of let's fix this. And again, I want that to end in sheltering. Please, I implore you, anybody who wants to go down and tour the building facility down there and with the pallet shelters down in Everett, I'd be glad to arrange and accompany with that. I think it'd be a worthy field trip, and we can come back with information to give the group in 2 weeks' time. Thanks for your time now.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? All right, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend, and we will see you in 2 weeks on October 9th. We are adjourned.
The recording has stopped.